This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven. And today I'm joined by a very distinguished and interesting guest, Tim Smit, who you will all have heard of from his Cornish connections to Heligan and to the Eden project. And I was really keen to get Tim on. Actually, do you know, I met his daughter at Chelsea and I was chatting to her about Eden, etc., and all the new things. And we just chatted away very happily. And it suddenly occurred to me that Tim would be wonderful to hear about on the podcast. Welcome, Tim. How are you doing this morning?
I am magnificent today. It's a lovely day and the storm is not storming.
Oh, is it not? Gosh, we've still got storming here, I can tell you. Anyway, well, I would love for those of you who don't know your sort of deeper biography. I mean, I don't think we need to do the pop star and all that kind of stuff because, you know, there we are. They can look that up. But I'd love to hear how you got into Heligan, first of all, and then how that developed into Eden. But almost more than anything, I'd love to hear what you're up to at the moment. But yeah, so tell us about Heligan.
Well, in a nutshell, I got fed up with the music industry, moved to Cornwall, decided to lead my life in a much more instinctive way, spent all the money I'd made in the music industry on a money pit of a farmhouse, and then decided I'd try and do something else. Someone delivered a pig to my door, having said that the pig was going to slaughter if I didn't look after it, and I seemed to have a very nice garage, but no car to go in it, and couldn't the pig go there? And that started a journey which led me to a great interest in domestic farm animals, having been completely won over by the love affair between Horace, the boar that I took delivery of, and subsequently his paramour, Doris, and their offspring was an inspiration. And I went to look for some land, and the land I chose was unavailable. But as I was drinking coffee with the man whose land it was, he told me that he'd inherited the estate next door and he didn't know what he was going to do with it because he had no money. And I went to see it with him the following day, and I fell hopelessly in love with it. And I couldn't tell you the difference between any plant, or I knew nothing about plants, but it was the most marvelous stage set. It was the most fantastic stage set. It was Sleeping Beauty. And that night, I shook hands with John Willis, because that was his name. And we've been friends ever since. And we embarked on a journey where I didn't pay rent because I couldn't afford that. But what we did was we said whatever visitors we could persuade to come to Heligan, he and I would split the proceeds. And over the last 30 years, we've been very happy. It's been a most remarkable journey, and it's led me to love horticulture, love gardeners, be astonished at how we've managed to become a nation in which we've forgotten that heritage, which is extraordinary considering we're an island, and also deeply angry at an education system which seems to think that growing things is something you discover every 3 or 4 years as an education program, or it appears in some posh magazine as a sort of middle-class lifestyle choice, as opposed to it's fundamental to our future and existence and appreciating that we're part of the natural world. So all that came from discovering the estate, which was Heligan, and the journey we've been on restoring it. It's a cliche to say to its former glory. In fact, it's probably better than it ever was. I mean, we've got 23 gardeners there today, whereas in its heyday, it had 22.
That's amazing.
It's fantastic. I mean, people forget it's just such a miraculous thing. I mean, you don't, and you give so much pleasure to so many people by reminding them. But the life-affirming nature of planting things which then come up It's almost like appreciating a sunrise, isn't it?
It is.
It's such a big thing that it seems almost ridiculous to talk about it. But a lot of people who don't have the privilege that we do, I just want to introduce them to it and to make them realize that growing stuff is a large chunk of what's made us who we are.
And I mean, I couldn't agree more, of course, with that. But that's why I wanted to get you on now, as sort of spring is on the horizon rather than right here. But, spring is around the corner. And with that, the optimism of everything coming back into growth. But I think what it seems to me to have read a bit about you and have met you a few times is that you have the confidence to, if you believe in something, you'll get behind it and you can initiate change. And what do you put that down to? I mean, that's a trite question in a way, but it's a confidence, but also, well, you tell me, what do you think it is in your personality type and your background that has given you this ability to initiate really big projects, sometimes controversially, that it's not always popular. But I admire that very much, that you can plough on and you're not thin-skinned. Tell me a bit about why you think you're that person.
Golly, well, off the top of my head, I would suggest the reason is that I was born, I'm half Dutch, half English, and my Dutch side were blue-collar millers, and my English side were posh mill owners. And the kind of social democratic side of Holland, I actually preferred the blue collar life. I felt more alive in it. And I was forced, and I say this literally, I was forced to go to an English private school because my dad worked for the airlines. And where he was posted, they didn't have either English or Dutch schools. And my grandparents in Holland were too old to look after me in a day school there. So I was paid for by the airline to go to a public school in Britain. And my loathing, in fact, where I went. I went to Cranbrook, right next to where you lived. And my loathing of that kind of English establishment certainty that comes from breeding is actually a real driver for me. I get angry to the core of my being at the notion of privilege without merit. And I also have this thing about England, which is my adopted country, and I adore it. I mean, what other place on earth can you say what you like and you don't end up face down in a ditch? And people are really hugely generous here in so many ways. But the thing I find saddest about England is the ability to say no to so much because it somehow doesn't relate to an ill-remembered nostalgia of the past. And it enrages me because I think we're living probably at the most exciting time since humans have ever been alive. And yet we've created a system of media coverage and storytelling, which must be so dispiriting to every child to think that all us middle-aged so-and-sos have trashed the world. We're going to hell in a handcart. And every fiber of my being tells me wherever I go, I can see that we're on the verge of a completely new green revolution in which maybe humans will discover their destiny. And I abhor the media for what they're doing to our young people. And it infects everybody, and it infects their confidence. And yet, just get up in the morning and see what a beautiful place we live in and what the opportunities are and how clever young people are. In fact, we'd all be so much better off if we were prevented from just saying no. Really.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you feel the same, but there's something so depressing, especially middle-aged British men and their ability to talk about the past, which is a complete lie. It never existed the way they tell it. Anyway, enough ranting.
No, not at all. I mean, I think this is really interesting. I think I definitely have found, as somebody, I suppose, who could now class myself as an entrepreneur, that we are a very anti-entrepreneurial nation. I mean, I have a lot of friends in America, or quite a few friends, and there, somebody with a business like mine is sort of greeted with warmth and almost admiration, whereas here it's much more complicated than that, and one is somehow thought to be greedy, thrusty. There isn't the interest in new ideas, particularly business ideas. And that's what you're talking about, really, isn't it? That we are a conservative nation with a small c down to our shoelaces.
Oh, we are. There's a fantastic paragraph in a book by Peter Ackroyd, the biographer. He did, I think, 5-part massive history of Britain. And in the first edition, he has an epilogue in which the first edition goes from year dot to the Tudors, to the Battle of Bosworth. And he says in his epilogue, which is only about a page long, he said, I never read history, but the thing I've learnt from writing this first book is, A, Britain is a country which actually has been built by the French mafia, who understood that if you killed people but then made someone the same title as the person you killed, it came down to a vote by God. But then the most brilliant insight, he said the question that was really knocking at my door was, how is it that probably the most powerful soft power nation in the world, which Britain, I think, is so conservative? And he says, I've discovered what it is. He said, in Britain, for innovation to succeed, it must not be new under any circumstances. It must be
Brilliant.
something you've rediscovered from the past, you've blown the dust off it.
It's like in plants now. It does really make me laugh because everything is about 1970s sort of mauves and sort of milky coffee colours. And for me, it was what I absolutely abhorred in the 70s when I was a child. And I'm not so massively keen on it now either. But what's so funny is it's so trendy. Anyway.
You're going to find avocado bathroom wares coming back. You be careful.
I know. But I do love the way things turn, though, too, which is that sort of dried flowers for your and my generation are really not what we want. But for my children's generation, dried flowers, straw flowers, heliochrysums, all that kind of stuff, alliums are absolutely the trendiest thing because, of course, they're incredibly sustainable. So, I mean, what I sort of feel with you is it seems to me that there are various pillars of massive importance in whatever you do. One is entrepreneurialism, which we've touched on anyway. But another, without doubt, is education. And you are a passionate believer in educating the old or the young in new things. And so, I mean, I know you've got a new project in Cornwall creating a sort of world cooking school and stuff, but also at Eden, it's hugely about spreading the word, isn't it, and education?
Yeah, I mean, I love that Gandhi quote, what do you think about Western education? He says, I think they should have some. And I think the weirdest thing, Sarah, let's be honest, if we were looking back 200 years hence and you were saying, what do you think you should have in a curriculum for young people? And you're an island nation and you can see what's happening to the world's climate, even if you are denying it to the core of your being, wouldn't you think, if you were being fair to your offspring and their offspring, that one of the things you'd say is, I think you should learn how to produce food. And maybe then also, how do you cook it? And then maybe explore how these things may have a large part to play in your well-being. I mean, I think we've spoken of this before, or probably separate. I can't remember whether you've done it together. I bought a bankrupt golf course some years ago because I wanted to turn it into an orchard. And we have 3,800 trees, and they're all grafted specially. And the really weirdest thing for me, for that whole experience, was being phoned up by Cranfield University, who said, wow, we'd like to work with you because we've discovered that all of the, or I think it was all or almost all the varieties of fruit that have been bred since 1950 have replaced the antioxidants, the phenols, with sugars. And I am absolutely certain that the war that has taken place against heritage Make no mistake, the word heritage and heirloom, when it relates to horticulture, is a battle with the established big agriculture trying to pretend that what we grow is quaint and old fashioned and not for the future. And blow me down, will we be surprised when we discover that our well being is hugely enhanced through returning to some of these? Not all, don't eat Victorian peas, they'll kill you. But in general, I think we're going to have a revolution in respect for horticulture and the growing of food. And your question was about education. I think that there are things which you learn through growing, which the education system rather counterintuitively splits into silos. All those ridiculous subject titles, when almost everything you know or learn is from understanding the cycles and the place in which things sit. And my friend, the late Ken Robinson, who, he's becoming almost more of a guru since he left the earth than when he was alive. But he used to say all learning should be project based, because if every project brings in almost every subject, and that way you understand the links between everything and their importance. And I would raise a glass to that sentiment, and that's where I believe the future is going. And anybody who's a gardener understands the process of composting and regrowth. It's like old friends dying and coming back, isn't it? It's the most extraordinary thing. And I think the future, and it's very entrepreneurial and very capitalist when you bear in mind that about 40% of everything we grow and everything we mine is wasted. If you're worried about growth, the growth that can take place through creating a circular economy, the waste of one product is the foodstuff of the next. We've got such a huge opportunity coming up if we can master that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in Swiss schools, I think there is, I don't know enough about this, to be honest, but the whole composting thing at the end of the school yard so that people engage. And if they don't, the banana skin can go in the compost, but if they don't eat the banana, it will also go in the compost, but it's better to feed you. But then, and the whole cyclical nature, we are very, very, very removed from that. I agree. Anyway, we mustn't bash, as we say, there are many wonderful things about being British. But there's one other theme that I really wanted to chat through with you, which is, luckily for me, they all begin with E, so they were easy to remember. But education, entrepreneurialism, but also the environment, which obviously with compost we're massively already linked to, and all these things with you are completely linked. But I was very inspired by you saying about Eden that you're putting down this massive ground source extraction system so that the whole thing is going to be totally carbon neutral very, very soon. Will you talk a little bit about what's over the hill for most of us with less sort of, more domestic setups in terms of becoming more green households?
Gosh. Okay.
Am I putting you on the spot too much now?
Well, no. It's such a big subject.
I know.
And I have a loathing of talking about sustainability when I just call it life.
Yes. Okay.
And I think very often the words of sustainability become like hollow cliches. There's a really shocking study that was done by the University of Derby about people who recycle everything, and they found that it was actually more to do with fitting in socially with their peer group rather than having a deep sense of the environment. If you were to ask me, I think we're facing really significant change through climate change. We need to understand how to use our waste materials, and all over this country there are businesses springing up that are going to blow us away, which will make today feel so old-fashioned, probably 18 months away. We decided about 15 years ago we were going to try and raise the money to dig towards the center of the earth. Every school child knows it's hot in the middle of the earth. Therefore, if you dig towards it, you can use that heat. We went to see some ground source heat pumps. Ground source heat pumps is actually more of a domestic thing. And we went to a place called Landau in southern Germany and stood in this room just sweating with heat from the about 2 kilometers down. And we here in Cornwall are on a what is called the Cornubian basilith, which is the big lump of granite that comes from the center of the earth, and it holds its heat very, very well. So we raised the money and we began digging. We're now at 5.3 kilometers deep.
Wow, that's incredible.
The heat, well, yeah, it's great. And I love everybody going, wow. But one of the unexpected side effects of wow is, boy, is it difficult making it cooler.
Yes.
The heat exchangers.
Because you're getting a volcano.
Yeah. And I mean, we initially went that deep because we wanted the heat to come up. Basically, this is a very Janet and John explanation, but basically, if you have a pipe going straight down to 5.3 kilometers, it isn't straight, by the way, everybody. It goes many, many wobbles, but let's pretend it is. You pump cold water down, it hits the really hot rocks, creates superheated water, and that superheated water then comes up the other side of the pipe, and you then have all the heat you need, which is heating our biomes at Eden. But the really exciting thing is what you can do with the heat that comes off it. We made a mistake. We thought we were going to also make electricity as well, but it's far more efficient to have solar energy catching the sunlight and saving it by battery, and then having the warmth, which has got the huge need for energy coming from the center of the earth. And the thing is that people have got rather concentrated on this as if it was about warming our houses. To me, the really interesting thing for Britain as an island nation, and you heard it here, folks, for the first time, is that in 2030, the taxation regime, because of carbon taxes, is going to be so different. So if you have renewable energy in our island nation, it means you have your future in your own hands to be able to produce things. So, for example, if you have heat, you can work with a whole range of products, drying things, cooking things, creating environments for the living things to grow in. In our case, we're interested in prawns and various types of fish, but there's seaweeds, there's all sorts of herbs and things. We're going to have a green revolution coming out of this. So for us, we're going to be net zero, we hope, completely by 2030. It depends how you define it. You see, a company that defines itself as net zero, but then gets 1 million visitors a year, half of them coming in motor cars.
Yes, of course, yeah.
I don't think it's honest if you don't take account of that. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible because we want people to copy us. And of course, being a charitable trust, we want whatever advances we make technologically, we want other people to copy.
Yeah. Well, I really, you and I could talk for another hour or two, but we can't because you need to do something else, and probably so do I. But it's incredibly interesting talking to you, and I would love to talk to you again. So can we maybe in a few months' time reconnect and chat more about what's happening? But we'll finish on, so Morecambe, just tell us a little bit about the new project that's happening there, which I go to Morecambe Bay quite a lot because I travel up to Scotland a lot and I tend to stay near there. And it, as you said, it's one of the most beautifully, luminously beautiful places in the British Isles or the world. But tell us, so what you're doing there?
We are creating another Eden project, a very small one, because it's more like building a theatre, a living theatre there, rather than major exhibits. It's about the rhythms of life. What better place to do that than on a bay where the tide comes in faster than a horse can gallop, where your view across the bay is of the Lake District, where on many days, as you know, you can see weather forming in front of you. You can see clouds. It's like a Heathrow for birds, a breeding place for all the sea life. And we're taking all of those rhythms and patterns of both the diurnal and seasonal, and putting them in a human context. We're very interested in the fact that, isn't it hilarious that most humans, if you said we're influenced by the moon, they go, oh, you're like a werewolf, or whatever. And you're going, hang on, you're made of 70% water. And you go and look at a bay and that is being moved around by the moon. Learn a bit, work out how you're linked to all of these things. Yeah. And working with great scientists. I tell you what, it beats rock and roll. It's very, very exciting.
Yeah.
And there are so many talented people. Well, you know that.
Yeah. How exciting. Good. Well, really lovely to talk, and I hope we can talk again. And thank you so much for joining me.
It's been a pleasure. See you again soon.
Thanks so much for listening to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange. And next week, I'm joined by an old friend, Bea Andrews, who was our head gardener here 15 or so years ago. And she's come back to be our in-house florist. And she does all the arrangements for our open days and our course days and fills the barn, the greenhouse, the shop, the school, all with the most beautiful flowers picked from just outside the door. So join next week to hear about Bea's background and why she is the gardener that she is and what she's going to be doing for us here. See you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.